I don't know about you guys. Springing forward is hitting me hard this morning. Give me a second, okay? Now, springing forward. It's getting to be that time of year, right? I have things to look forward to over the next few weeks. I don't know about you guys, but I know that there's going to be a lot of plant buying and hole digging and all kinds of things. It's that time of year where we're starting to get ready for spring plants, flowers, vegetables, all those things. I know that around here, a lot of times people try to wait because there can always be frost all the way up until like July, which is just ridiculous. That is not the way God intended. I'm sure that is the work of Satan, that there could be snow in July. But it is spring. It's spring, right? And Laura is the one. Laura is awesome when it comes to plants. She has like a very green thumb. Me, on the other hand, I have like the deepest black of thumbs. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to planting, when it comes to flowers, all those kinds of things. I'm really good at, I can build planter boxes, right? I can build raised beds. I can do the hole digging. I can do all the manual labor kind of stuff. That I'm good at. When it comes to trying to keep something alive, even my children, I'm not so good. Yes, you're alive, but that's probably because of mom, not me. I'm not very good at it. A couple of years ago, I helped build some raised beds in our backyard for Laura. And, you know, they weren't super great, but I wanted to get something started for her, so we built some raised beds in our backyard. And I needed to go get some dirt to put into them, and so we go down to, I think it's Mountain View, right? If you go down Washburn towards the airport, there on the right-hand side, there's that nursery. And I go down there, and Laura has spent, like, meticulous time picking out exactly what she wants about the vegetables and the plants and all kinds of things, and gotten everything that she wants. And while she's doing that, I went up to one of the workers over on the other side of the nursery, and I was like, hey, I need some dirt. The lady says, okay, what do you need it for? Well, I built some raised beds for my wife. I need to put something in them. Okay, so what kind of dirt do you want? What do you mean, what kind of dirt do I want? Dirt. Well, she said, well, what are you going to grow in it? And what kind of sun does it have? And what kind of plants are you going to put in it? And all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I want dirt. And so she explained to me, well, you've got to have, there's potting soil, or there's raised bed soil, or there's, pre-fertilized stuff. And it goes through. I had no clue. At this nursery, they have like 30 kinds of dirt. And I'm sitting there going, wait, I just want the stuff to go in the beds, please. We worked it out finally. Laura had to come over and be like, okay, I'm planting vegetables, and it's going to be in this kind of a raised bed. And they went through and picked it out, and I just hauled it home. But I was just amazed. I was stunned at, like I said, I know nothing about growing living things. And so the fact that they had to pick out and select the right kind of dirt to put these plants in astounded me. But this morning, we're going to talk about gardening a little bit. We're going to talk about what Mark records Jesus teaching us about gardening. Like I said, in Mark chapter 4, if you're not there, it'll be up on the screen. But this is what it says, starting in verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching he said, listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear any grain. Still, other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, and some 100 times. Then Jesus said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." When he was alone, the 12 and the others that around him asked him about this parable. He told them, "The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing, but never perceiving, and ever hearing, but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven." Then Jesus said to them, "Don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? The farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path, where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the world, they quickly fall away. Still, others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires of other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. Gardening. Gardening according to Jesus. And it all comes down to the soil. First, before we get into the parable itself and talking about the kinds of soil and where the seed falls and all that kind of stuff, let's just talk about the fact that Jesus is talking to people out on a lake. If you remember what we've talked about so far in Mark, Jesus has been in things like houses or in synagogues. He has been in buildings. He has been in places that were enclosed. And all of a sudden, Jesus has to be outside on a lake. If you catch the change, Jesus' ministry is growing by leaps and bounds. There are so many people that are pressing towards Jesus that want to be close to him and to touch him, to hear his words and to feel his healing. There are so many people there that buildings can't contain the ministry that Jesus is doing now. And so Jesus has moved outside, away from these small buildings, from these places that couldn't hold enough, and he has gone out to a place on the lake. In reading about this, the place that they assume Jesus went to on the lake, it's kind of actually a pretty amazing little spot on the lake. There's this cove just outside the city of Capernaum. And it's basically a natural amphitheater. The way that the hillside works, it's staggered, it's footstepped up to the top of the hill, and it curves around the lake in such a way that they have gone and tested this, where somebody can be in a boat in the middle of this little cove, and they have a road up at the top of the hills now, and if somebody is just speaking normally in a boat, they can hear it in a car at the top of the hill. And the same works the other way. If somebody is in a car at the top of the hill, they can just say, "Hello," and the person down in the boat will hear them clear as day. So Jesus has gone to this place that is a natural way for people to be able to hear his message. He just goes out into the boat a little ways from the shore, and he's able to speak normally and be able to reach all of these people. He is able to give his message, to preach the word of God, to tell people about his Father without worry if people can hear or not hear. But the amazing thing is that there are so many that want to hear the good news. There are so many people who are pushing towards Jesus, who want to be a part of what he is doing or want to be where he is at. And it's mind-boggling that so many people could come to Jesus so quickly, right? We think that news travels fast now that we have things like the internet and social media, but somehow the word has gotten out and everybody has flocked to Jesus. And that might not seem important other than, Jesus has good news and we all want to hear it. But at the same time, that has something to do with what Jesus is talking about today. That has to do with what Jesus was preaching, because if you pay attention to the things around the parable, there's some difficult sayings that Jesus has in this that could kind of come off sounding a little mean or a little gruff or untypical of Jesus, right? Did you hear what he said in between telling the parable to the great crowd and telling the parable again to the disciples or to the people that were close around? He quotes Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah was told this by God, that they would be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. Like Jesus, normally we think about Jesus telling parables because he's using something that's ordinary and everyday to explain something to people that is not ordinary and everyday, something that is physical to help explain something that is spiritual. Usually when Jesus is telling a parable, it's because he wants people to get the idea and understand it in a way that they can apply it to their lives. And yet when we get to this parable, it seems like Jesus is saying, no, I'm telling this in a way where people don't get it. I'm telling it in a way that when people hear it, they might see that it's a nice story or hear that it's a nice story, and they can look around from this amphitheater that they're sitting in, and they can see somebody out planting. They can see later on, Jesus talks about things like a mustard seed or a lampstand. He talks about several different agricultural things over the next few verses. And from the point that they are sitting, you could probably look out and see every single thing that Jesus is talking about. And so he's telling his disciples, look, they can hear this, and they can look around them and see the things I'm talking about, and yet somehow it's not going to make sense. Because if it did make sense, they would turn and be forgiven. This huge crowd, this large number of people that are doing everything they can to be in the presence of Jesus, I think the first thing that we've got to pay attention to is, what is their mindset? Why are they trying to get to Jesus? What is the point of being a part of this crowd that follows Jesus around? Most of the time, I think these people, unfortunately, are just like us in the fact that they see that Jesus can provide things like healing. They see that Jesus can provide, later on, food for the masses, right? He can do all of these things, and so people get in their heads, hey, I can go see him, and if I get close enough, he can make all my problems go away, which doesn't seem like a bad thing. But what I'm getting at is their whole focus is me-centered. Their whole idea of getting close to Jesus is not because they want to be close to the Father, but because they want to be close to the person who can make their problems go away. They don't care about a relationship with God. They care about getting something and then getting out of there. At least that's what it seems to be, because later on we'll find that most of these people go running away. When things get tough, when things get difficult, when problems arise, that's when everybody leaves. This number of people that want to be close to Jesus at this point want to be close to Jesus because they can get something out of it. Their focus is on helping themselves. And Jesus says, look, if they could actually listen to this parable and understand what I mean by it, it would change their lives. And I think what Jesus is getting at is that when we are so focused on ourselves, we can't really truly hear what God is saying to us, because it doesn't have to do with what I want him to say. It doesn't have to do with what I think he should say. It's what he's saying is his own words, and I want him to say my words. I want him to do the things I want, right? And so because their idea is focused on how can I get something out of Jesus, they're missing the point. They don't understand. There's this huge crowd of people, and Jesus is disappointed because how many of them are actually going to listen to what he has to say? Even the disciples, even those closest that he is explaining to, explaining to them about the parable, even a lot of them are going to have difficulty, are going to run away, are going to be faced with trials, and on the first couple of tries, they're not going to do so great. Right? But Jesus still says, let me explain this to you. Let me help you get past who you think God should be, and let me tell you who God actually is. That's what Jesus wanted to do. Let me help you understand. Jesus is saying, let me help you understand so that your life will be changed and you will be a different person. So let's take a look at these things. Let's take a look at these soils right quick. One of the things that I want to start off with, one of the things that I want you to understand right away is that most of the time when we read a parable like this, most of the time when we go through and we listen to what Jesus has to say about a sower planting the seed, right? We think, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like we tend to think, well, I am one type of soil, and whatever I am, that's it. What I mean by that is I've talked to people like new Christians, and in our discussion, they talk about how they're afraid that Satan is going to come and steal the word that God has planted in them. They're afraid that because they're new or because they don't understand everything, that Satan's just going to come and swipe whatever God has given them, and that's it. That was their only shot. That was their only chance. And now, if Satan steals the word that God has given them, then they're just going to be out of luck because they're that soil or that path, right? But I want you to understand that I don't think that Jesus is trying to tell you, you are only one thing. And we'll get to some reasons why I think that, but I don't want you to just assume, well, I'm one type of person. I am one type of soil, if you will, one kind of dirt. And I can't do anything about it. What I am is what I am, and there's no changing it. But the whole point of the gospel is that we were all a bunch of dirt, and Jesus changed us. We were all a pile of dirt, and God made something beautiful out of it that he cared about, that he loved. And so let's take a look at these soils and try to remember that you are not just one thing. You are not just stuck in one part of life, but God is trying to work in your life. And we're all going to go through different parts of our lives or different times in our lives where we might be rocky soil, or we might be good soil, or we might be the kind of people who have shallow roots. But the point is, where we're going with this today is that God is helping us to develop good soil in order that he might plant something that will grow into something beautiful in us. So, like I said, that first soil that Jesus talks about, right? It's the path. The sower is going out and spreading seed to plant his field, probably grain, I think is what Jesus is talking about here. But he says that some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. The seed that falls on the path, well, there's a couple of things here that I think we need to pay attention to. First is that Mark, up to this point, has already alluded to the fact that Jesus is going on the offensive. Maybe alluded is not strong enough a word. Mark, in the previous chapter, if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, has Jesus telling people that he is not just going on the offensive, that he has broken into Satan's house, tied him up, and is taking whatever he wants. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems pretty forward. Jesus is claiming that he can go into Satan's house and tie him up and walk out of the place with everything. And he's already proven it because he has been driving out demons. He has been removing any kind of physical barrier that would keep somebody from Jesus. He is healing people. He has already been confronting religious leaders who were more concerned about their power and position than they were about helping people develop a relationship with God. And so he's told them, look, this is not the way to do it. He's calling them out. Jesus has been taking step after step to make sure that Satan knows he doesn't get to win. Now, if it were you or if it were me, and our enemy, somebody we don't like, was on the offensive like that, if somebody that we knew was fighting against us like that, do you think you would just sit there and take it? I don't think so. I don't think any one of us are the kind of people that would just be like, oh man, somebody has invaded my home and I'm just going to sit here and watch as they do what they want. For me, especially if somebody came into my home and was affecting my family, was threatening my family, there's no way I'm going to just sit there and let them do that. Satan is the same way. Jesus has broken in, and he is doing his best to save people from Satan's house, but that's not going to sit well with him. And so Mark is having us realize that Jesus knows that the devil isn't going to lay down and take it. He's not just going to sit by and be happy that Jesus is stealing all of his stuff, that Jesus is redeeming the people that Satan thought he had in his grasp. And so you've got to be aware, you've got to be ready and know that Satan, our enemy, our adversary, the accuser, is going to try to take everything back that he can. But the easiest way for him to do that is to grab something up before it can take root. For us, there are going to be times in our lives when we are that path where we feel like we have been trodden on, where we have been stamped into the ground, we have been walked all over. And it might be something that, we've just been beat up by other people emotionally. It might be a time where we are so angry and we just can't let go of it. There could be a time where we just need a word from God to help us be forgiving or to be forgiven. There's going to be a time in our lives where we need a word from God to help us understand grace and to give grace. There's going to be a time in our lives where we are just faced with people we don't like or don't like us, and we need Jesus to give us something to make it through the situation. But because, like that crowd that was in the amphitheater listening to Jesus, because we are focused on what we want and what we feel, what we think Jesus is going to say or what he should say, Satan is able to come in and snatch up what God really is saying to us. There are going to be times when I am so hurt that I am consumed by my hurting, and I kind of create this shield around me, this rocky place, this solid thing. A hard heart is what they call it in the Old Testament. When we harden our hearts and we don't allow Jesus to speak to us, to speak into our lives. And it's at those moments where we have to find a way to stop, to recognize that we have hardened our hearts to Jesus, that we have cut him off, and say, God, I have made a mistake, and just say, please soften my heart. Because I know in my own case, it is impossible for me to do it on my own. There are times when I get to that point where I feel like I am the path where I have been walked all over and I just don't want to deal with anything. I am ready to just be rock solid and not let anyone or anything in. And somehow, you've got to let Jesus pull out the rototiller. You've got to let God come in there and till that soil up until it's soft again. Make it usable again. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that you can just make it happen. But in those moments, you can usually recognize it because of people around you will let you know. But you've got to let Jesus come in with that rototiller. Till up that tough, trodden on soil, that compacted, useless stuff, and let him make you useful again. The next kind of soil, right? So the first seed that's thrown lands on that trodden on path, and we've got to let God come in and change that and till it up and make it useful again. The next one is that sometimes the seed falls on rocky soil. And this is the thing that I hate in gardening the most, probably. When I have to try to dig a hole or clear out a space for Laura to plant something and there are rocks in it, That always annoys me to no end. When we were living in the Portland area, one of the places that we lived in, it had some roses in the front of it. And they were old and kind of bedraggled. They needed some serious love. And not only that, but Laura wanted to be able to change up what was in front. And so we decided we were going to dig up this flower bed that was in front of the house. And there had been a layer of like river rock on top. And we thought, okay, we'll just rake that off, and then we can start fresh, right? We can start planting whatever, she can start planting whatever she wants, and I'll just, dig the holes. So we got out rakes, and we start raking. And no matter how deep we got, they must have gone like a foot down with these rocks. And they seemed like they were never ending. And you couldn't dig them out because they were so compacted in there that you'd just break the tip off your shovel trying to get them out. I hear from rumors that I've come across from other people that you can use dynamite to get rocks out. But it's probably not a wise choice. But trying to get these rocks out in order to make this flower bed useful again, the rocks seem to keep coming. I don't understand how, but it feels like rocks can multiply when they sit next to each other. I hate them. But when there are rocks in the soil, that means there's no dirt around the rocks, right? When they're multiplying like that, when they're so close together, there's no room for roots to grow. There's no room for a plant to take hold, to put its tendrils down into the dirt and be able to get nourishment, to get water and food, to get all those things that it needs to sustain itself. There are all kinds of things that go wrong with the rocks. But that's what we need as people, as plants. Take your pick, I don't know. But the way that Paul puts it, he says in Colossians chapter 2 that we need to be rooted in Jesus, that we need to be growing in him in order to be sustained. And if there are rocks in the soil, there's no way to do that. They prevent us and block us from getting to those nutrients that we need from a relationship with God. So you've got to start digging them out. And it's a pain, and it's a process. And then once you've gotten the rocks out, the next thing that I hate about rocks is that you usually find some big ones, right? You find a big rock, you take it out, and now you've got this big giant hole where the rock used to be. And you've got to find a way to fill it. You've got to find a way to make that empty space useful again. Now that you've got the rock out of the way, you can't just put a plant in air, so you've got to find dirt, you've got to find soil, you've got to find things to put back into those holes that you've just made in order that plants can be put into it. And that's where we run into a problem as people. We do a lot of work, we strive, and we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into pulling rocks out of the dirt, raking them up, digging them up, grabbing them with our bare hands, whatever we have to do, and then we're left with this big giant hole in our heart. And what do we fill it with? If you're not careful, without even meaning to, without even trying to, things start to fall into that hole and fill it up. And we just have to be careful that those things that are going into that space that the rock left are things that are going to nurture and nourish and help us grow. We have to make sure that those things that go back into that space are going to help hold us up and are going to give us something to be rooted in. Because there's a lot of things that could go in there that won't do any of those things for us. So Jesus talks about this soil that has the rocks in it that prevent roots from growing. And we have to, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we don't want that. We want to have roots that grow deep into Jesus. And so when we pull the rocks out, those holes that are left behind by the rocks have to be filled with Jesus. They have to be filled with something that God is giving us that will help us to grow and not just another hard space or another poisonous thing. Something worth filling those holes with. So there's the soil that is just the path. There is the soil that is rocky. And then Jesus talks about the soil with the weeds. Weeds are, again, of the devil. And I mean that in every way possible. Weeds are awful. Yeah. So one of the things that I have found nice about being over here rather than over in the valley is that we don't have nearly the blackberry bushes over here that we did when we lived over on the other side of the mountains. I'm sure you guys know this, but I find it amazing that the state of Oregon has decided that for most of the I-5 corridor, they don't need to build a barrier between the north and southbound lanes. They just let the blackberries grow, and that prevents everybody from switching lanes. Because blackberries are awful, at least when they're let to grow out of control. I mean, if you put them in your garden, have fun trying to keep them contained, but the blackberry bush is just terrible because you can't get it to die, you can't pull it out, and if you try to grab it, it's going to rip your hands to shreds. Jesus is talking about these things in life that we let grow in our hearts, in our souls. There are things that grow up along with what Jesus has planted, and they could be all kinds of worries. There could be all kinds of problems that we allow to get in our way and choke out what Jesus is trying to do in us. And they're difficult to get rid of. Like, I hate rocks, and so I make a big deal about trying to get rid of rocks in our lives. But, trying to pull thorn bushes, thistles, trying to get rid of things that are pokey and scratchy and painful. There's no removing them from your life without blood. I don't care who you are. You could be the best gardener in the world. I have not seen anyone who can get rid of blackberries in a way that does not cause destruction, that does not cause the shedding of blood. And see, there's the thing. Jesus is talking about these things that are prickly, that are dangerous to get rid of in our lives. And he's trying to remind us that we have someone who is already willing to take the thorns for us, who already shed blood for us. They didn't know it yet when they were hearing this parable, but Jesus was preparing them and letting them know there is someone out there who is willing with his bare hands to take hold of those problems, those pains, the deceit of wealth, the desire for power, pride, all those things that choke out what God is doing in our lives. He has grabbed them with his bare hands and ripped them out, shedding his own blood so that you didn't have to. There's soil that has the weeds and the thorns. There's the rocky soil that doesn't allow us to grow roots. One thing that, I know I'm hung up on these rocks, but something that is amazing to me, where I think that Jesus is trying to point out that not just one type of soil. When you think about Peter, his name meant rock. And we always think of that being solid foundation. But did you ever stop and think that when Jesus was on trial and about to be executed, Peter was real quick to become not a rock, but rocky soil? Where when he was faced with persecution and trouble, his roots withered up real fast. Judas is like a field of weeds, where he was in the midst of Jesus, he was hearing Jesus teaching, but as soon as money came along, as soon as there was something that gave him another option or that he thought was a better option than Jesus, he took it. Right? The disciples, for the most part, went through a cycle of these soils. They were rocky at some times. At some points, they just couldn't hear or listen or understand what Jesus was telling them. Sometimes they were letting the problems of life get in their way. They were different kinds of soil. But Jesus, he ends with this. He says, then there is the seed that falls on the good soil. The good soil. I don't know about gardening. I don't know how to raise things, make them live. I don't know how to get plants to produce enough fruit to give me more than a meal or even a meal. But one thing I do know, one thing that I have come to understand is that good soil doesn't happen by accident. Good soil doesn't just happen. Good soil, the kind that makes things grow, takes work. I mean, for me, it's not necessarily my work. It's me going down to a nursery and having a whole lot of other people do a lot of work to make a couple cubic yards of soil for me. Just because I didn't do the work doesn't mean that somebody didn't have to do work to make the soil. For other people, it's going and finding a piece of land and then digging up the rocks and digging up the weeds and tilling the soil and putting in nutrients and doing all those things to make a field useful. But good, wholesome, healthy soil doesn't just happen. It takes work. It takes an effort. It takes changing our perspective from just ourselves to changing or to becoming the perspective of God. That's what I love about the ending of this parable is, and I'll just close with these last two things, is that when God has good soil, He includes us in the work. We do this not because we can earn anything, not because we can make the seed grow on our own. We don't do this because we are some kind of amazing gardener and we think that we can produce all kinds of wonderful things for ourselves, but we get to help produce good soil because we're excited about what God is going to do. Because we want to be a part of where He is going and what He is doing. We get to be gardeners with God because He is doing such a good work, and He has brought us along and said, let me show you how to do this. That's why in 1 Corinthians, right? 1 Corinthians, Paul is talking about, I know it kind of seems out of context right now, but it'll make sense. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says this, "What after all is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes it grow." We are servants, just like Paul, just like Apollos, like Peter, like all of the church fathers. All of these people down through history have been servants of God, helping plant, helping water, helping till the soil, making sure that there is a place for God's word to land and to grow, because God will make it grow, because God is doing a good work, because He is sharing His word with us. God is the one who makes it grow. We help provide good soil because we want God to do something in our lives. We want God to make His word grow in us. And then, as I want to close with this question. As I was looking over this and I was studying and reading through this passage, it struck me. Verse 20, it says, Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. Some 30, some 60, and some 100 times what was sown. My question is, who is the crop for? Who is the crop for? Because as I was listening to Jesus' words, as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, if I am a plant, or if I am something that was sown by God, and He is causing me to grow, am I growing something for myself, or am I growing it for God? Am I growing it for others? The amount of fruit, of grain, whatever it is that you want to imagine Jesus talking about in this parable, when He says that you're producing something that is 60 or 100 times what was planted, if you imagine that in terms of real food, that is way more than any one of us could ever use. That is so much more than we could in ourselves ever eat or have a use for. But because God desires life, because he desires others to come to know him, because he desires others to have a producing, useful, healthy life, we produce, or he produces in us more than we can ever use, because one, it honors him, and two, when we produce more food, more produce, whatever it is, that goes on to become seed to plant more crops. It's because when God does a work in our lives, we produce fruit to honor him, and he uses that to plant new crops, to plant new people, to bring others into the field. When we produce something from a seed that God has planted in us, it's not just for us, but it is for those around us. And that is what Jesus wanted this crowd to understand, what he wanted them to get. It wasn't that Jesus was doing all of these things just so they could get something and go home. He was doing miracles. He was casting out demons and healing and expressing God's kingdom to them so that they would hopefully stop focusing on just what they wanted and they would see who God was and produce something more. Not for themselves, but for others. That kind of love that God has, to lay down his life so that others can have life. Who are you producing something for? Is it for you? Or is God producing something in you so that you can share it? Let's pray.